Vera Jo Rigel was born on July 11, 1986 in Findlay, Ohio, to parents Verna Messersmith and Willard Rigel. Vera was born with intellectual disabilities that left her with the cognitive abilities of a child between 8 and 12 years old. Additionally, she suffered from ADHD, which further complicated her developmental journey. Despite these challenges, Vera possessed a gentle and sweet nature that everyone adored. Her sister Ashley, who described Vera as her best friend, spoke of their special bond and how they shared everything with each other. This close relationship would prove to be a source of comfort for Vera throughout her difficult life. She was known for her friendly demeanor and her willingness to help others in any way she could. Her uncle recalled that even as a young child, she never complained and was always eager to lend a hand to those in need. This inherent kindness, while admirable, may have also made her more vulnerable to exploitation later in life. At the young age of 11, she experienced a horrific betrayal when her father, Willard, began molesting her. This sexual abuse continued until Willard was eventually caught and convicted. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison at Lima's Allen Correctional Institution for his heinous crimes against his daughter. This abuse that Vera endured at such a young age undoubtedly had a profound impact on her emotional and psychological development. It likely contributed to her difficulties in forming healthy relationships and understanding appropriate boundaries. Unfortunately, the end of her father's abuse did not mark the end of Vera's suffering. After Willard was imprisoned, Vera's mother, Verna, entered into a new relationship. Tragically, this new boyfriend was also physically and abusive toward Vera. Fast forward to when Vera turned 19, her life would take a significant turn for the worse. This is when she entered into a relationship with a 13-year-old named Zachary Brooks, and thus got involved with the Brooks family. The Brooks family was headed by Sherry Lynn Brooks, often referred to as Sugar Babe. Sherry's background was marred by her own experiences of sexual abuse as a child, which seemed to have warped her perception of family dynamics and appropriate behavior. This trauma manifested in disturbing ways, including an obsession with little girls that began when she was just 16 years old and attempted to take someone else's baby. Furthermore, her history with CPS was extensive and troubling. She had given birth to 9 children, but her first 5 were taken away by CPS due to reports of abuse and neglect. The loss of her only daughter, Maria, was particularly traumatic for Sherry, and she seemed to spend much of her life trying to fill this void. Instead of addressing her issues and changing her behavior, Sherry continued to have children. According to an anonymous source, CPS eventually, quote, got tired of messing with her and let her keep them. This decision would have far-reaching consequences, not only for Sherry's biological children, but also for Vera. When Vera entered the Brooks household, she was immediately seen as an opportunity by Sherry. Vera's intellectual disabilities and history of abuse made her particularly vulnerable to manipulation. Sherry, with her fixation on having a baby girl, saw Vera Jo as a potential surrogate to fulfill her desires. The living conditions in the Brooks home were appalling. Police reports described a house that was filthy and unsafe. The bathtub was filled with black mold and rotting food was found under mattresses. Shockingly, there was even a pig confined to a closet, separated only by a piece of plywood. Cockroaches infested the home and visitors reported a foul odor permeating the area. Despite these conditions, Vera remained in the home, likely due to a combination of her limited cognitive abilities, psychological manipulation, and a lack of alternative options. The isolation from her own family and support systems made it increasingly difficult for her to recognize or report the abuse she was experiencing. Vera's relationship with Zachary resulted in a pregnancy, and she gave birth to a daughter named Willadine. This event seemed to solidify Sherry's interest in keeping Vera under her control. Sherry's obsession with having a granddaughter was so intense that she reportedly made Vera drink 3 bottles of castor oil, an old midwife remedy for inducing labor, so that the baby would be born on Sherry's own birthday. From the moment Willadine was born, it became clear that Vera was viewed merely as a surrogate womb by the Brooks family. Sherry claimed custody of the baby before she was even born, treating Vera as little more than an incubator for her desired granddaughter. As time passed, the dynamics within the Brooks household grew increasingly toxic. Zachary, who was thrust into fatherhood at the age of 13, began to lose interest in both Vera and his role as a father. This shift in Zachary's attitude led to an increase in his violent behavior towards the mother of his child. He would beat her severely, especially when she objected to his new girlfriends. These beatings became so regular and brutal that Vera's spirit was gradually broken, reducing her to a battered individual struggling to survive in a hostile environment. The abuse Vera Jo endured was not limited to physical violence. She was routinely denied food, forced to sleep in inhumane conditions, and subjected to various forms of emotional and psychological torture. As Willadine grew, a conflict arose within the family. Zachary no longer wanted to be burdened with Vera, but Sherry was unwilling to let her leave with Willadine, who was still legally Vera's daughter. This conflict ultimately led to the horrific decision to murder Vera, with many believing that Sherry was the mastermind behind the plot. In the 2 years leading up to Vera's murder, there were numerous red flags that should have alerted authorities to the scheme. Police had been called to the family home at least 10 times due to complaints of harassment, threats, child abuse, neglect, fighting, and poor living conditions. Despite these frequent calls, the system repeatedly failed to protect Vera and Willadine. One particularly troubling incident occurred on January 21st when Vera Jo's sister Ashley called the police. Ashley reported that Vera was being held against her will and wasn't allowed to be involved with her baby at all. Officer Marcia Hill responded to this report and discovered that Sherry was Vera's guardian and the payee for her disability checks. This financial control likely contributed to Vera Jo's inability to leave the abusive situation. When Officer Hill investigated, she found Vera with a bruised and cut face along with a broken nose. Despite these clear signs of abuse, Vera claimed that the injuries were caused by an ex-boyfriend from Lima. This lie was likely a result of the psychological manipulation and fear instilled in her by the Brooks. As the abuse escalated, Vera's situation grew increasingly dire. The events leading directly to the murder began when Daniel Bixler and his girlfriend Nicole Peters moved into the Brooks home about a week before the incident. Daniel, a transient with a history of drug abuse and violence, quickly became embroiled in the family's dysfunction. It was Daniel and Nicole who would ultimately carry out the brutal murder, though many believe they were acting under the influence and direction of Sherry. The tragic murder of Vera Jo Rigel occurred on March 27, 2011. According to Scotty Emmons, son of Sherry Brooks and Daniel Bixler Sr., after the initial assault, Daniel and Nicole announced they were going to take a walk with Vera. They ordered her to put on her shoes. By this point, Vera was terrified, sensing the danger she was in. In a heartbreaking moment, she asked Scotty if he could accompany them, clearly fearing for her safety. Scotty, attempting to protect Vera, went to put on his shoes. However, when he returned, Zachary Brooks produced a knife and threatened Scotty, preventing him from going with them. This intervention ensured that Vera Jo would be alone with her killers. Daniel and Nicole then forced Vera out of the home. They then took her to nearby railroad tracks. After they arrived, the two stripped Vera of her clothes in the cold weather. Nicole Peters initiated the attack, stabbing Vera once. She then handed the knife to Daniel, saying, "Show me your love." Daniel responded by stabbing Vera multiple times throughout her body, including her legs, which prevented any possible chance of escape. Nicole then took the knife back and continued the assault. It's also said that throughout this attack, Vera fought for her life. She attempted to defend herself, crying out that she couldn't breathe. Her pleas for mercy fell on deaf ears as her attackers continued. Once the act was done, the two killers returned to the Brooks home. The discovery of Vera's body came in the early hours of March 27th at around 2 a.m. A train operator noticed something on the tracks near the Blanchard River and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Bridge. Initially thinking it might be a deer, closer inspection revealed that it was the lifeless body of a young woman. The train operator immediately alerted the authorities. When police arrived at the scene, one of the officers recognized the victim as Vera Jo, who lived just a couple of blocks away on Center Street. The investigation moved swiftly. Detectives quickly focused on Daniel Bixler and Nicole Peters as the primary suspects. Bixler, who had only been released from prison 3 weeks before the murder, had a troubled history. He had been living as a transient, consuming alcohol, ecstasy, cocaine, and marijuana on a daily basis. In a surprising turn of events, Bixler led the police to the murder weapon, a butcher knife that he and Peters had disposed of in the Blanchard River. This cooperation, however, did not mitigate the severity of the charges against him. Both Bixler and Peters were charged with aggravated murder as the investigation continued. As the case unfolded, the true extent of the horror Vera Jo had endured in the Brooks household came to light. It became clear that her murder was the culmination of years of abuse and exploitation. The investigation revealed that she had been living with the Brooks family for the past 5 years, during which time she had given birth to a daughter. The aftermath of the murder saw a series of legal proceedings that many feel failed to deliver true justice for Vera Jo. Daniel Bixler initially pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. However, he later changed his plea to guilty on charges of aggravated murder, kidnapping, felonious assault, and tampering with evidence. During his court hearing, he remained emotionless as he admitted, "I went to the tracks with Vera Jo and I ended up stabbing her." He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 40 years. Nicole Peters also pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit murder, 2 counts of kidnapping, and tampering with evidence. In her court appearance, she made shocking claims about the premeditated nature of the murder. She stated that the murder had been planned and implicated several members of the Brooks family in this conspiracy. According to Peters, Zachary, Sherry, Garth, who is one of Sherry's sons, and Shannon Brooks had all helped plan the crime. She even claimed that Zachary had provided them with the murder weapon. Peters even offered a motive for the murder, alleging that it was planned after Shannon Brooks accused Vera of causing her to have a miscarriage by spraying mace. This claim, however, was never substantiated in court. Peters was sentenced to 23 years in prison for her role in the murder. The aftermath of the murder also saw charges brought against several members of the Brooks family for obstruction of justice. Michael Brooks pleaded guilty to 1 charge of obstructing justice, admitting that Daniel and Nicole had confessed the murder to him and his wife Shannon. Shannon Brooks also pleaded guilty to obstruction of justice. Sherry Brooks pleaded guilty to obstructing justice as well. She admitted that she knew Vera Jo had left the home with Daniel and Nicole, yet claimed to police that Vera had left with a new boyfriend. The sentencing of Bixler and Peters, along with the relatively light charges against the Brooks family members, left many feeling that justice had not been fully served. The wider conspiracy alleged by Nicole Peters was never fully explored in court, leaving many questions unanswered about the true extent of the Brooks family's involvement in Vera Jo's death. Judah Marshall Morgan's life began on June 17, 2017 in Layport County, Indiana. From the moment of his birth, he faced significant challenges. When he was born, Judah tested positive for drugs, immediately raising red flags about the ability of his biological parents, Alan Morgan and Mary Yoder, to provide adequate care for their newborn son. The presence of drugs in Judah's system at birth was not an isolated incident. Court documents reveal that in 2017, Judah's birth parents already had substantiated allegations of neglect and abuse concerning Judah's older brother. This history of familial issues set the stage for the Indiana Department of Child Services to intervene in Judah's case from the very beginning. Due to the serious concerns about the parents' ability to care for a newborn, DCS took immediate action. They made the decision to take the baby into custody directly from the hospital, making him a ward of the state. Fast forward to when Judah turned 4 months old, DCS made the decision to place him in foster care with his cousin, Jenna Hullett, and her husband. This placement would turn out to be a period of stability and love in Judah's life, lasting for nearly 4 years. The Hullett family provided Judah with a loving and stable home environment. These few years of Judah's life stand in stark contrast to the neglect and abuse he would later endure. During this time, Judah's biological parents had limited contact with him and were required to address their substance abuse issues and improve their parenting skills. But in early 2021, the process of reuniting Judah with Alan and Mary began. This decision was met with strong opposition from Judah's foster mother, who did not trust that the biological parents could take care of a child. Despite the objections of the foster parents, DCS proceeded with the reunification plan. The decision-making process that led to this outcome has since come under intense scrutiny. According to a federal lawsuit filed by Jenna, 3 DCS employees allegedly performed sham investigations, and their actions ultimately led to a tragic result. After being returned to his biological parents, Judah endured unimaginable abuse and neglect. One of the most disturbing aspects of the abuse was his frequent confinement in the home's basement. Court documents reveal that the 4-year-old boy was often kept in a cold, dark cellar where not a single light worked. This basement became Judah's prison, a place of punishment and isolation. The conditions in the basement were deplorable. Judah was routinely left naked with only a fuzzy blanket for comfort. He had no proper bed, and the only toilet facility provided was an infant-style toilet. The darkness was intentional, used as a scare tactic to further traumatize the young boy. Judah's confinement wasn't a matter of hours, but often days at a time. His mother, Mary, admitted to investigators that she would keep him in the basement even when Alan was away from home. This admission suggests that the basement confinement was a routine part of Judah's life, not just an occasional punishment. Additionally, Alan was the primary perpetrator of the violence. Court documents and testimony reveal that he would repeatedly beat Judah, often using a belt. The abuse was so severe that Judah's body was covered in bruises. The reasons given for these acts were trivial and heartbreaking. Alan claimed that he lashed out because Judah was not potty trained. Furthermore, Judah was subjected to severe neglect, including deliberate starvation. As a form of punishment, his parents would withhold food from him. This cruelty went beyond simple food restriction. A lock was placed on the refrigerator to prevent Judah from accessing food on his own. The neglect extended to basic hygiene and care. The child was often left in soiled diapers and denied the basic dignity of cleanliness. The home itself was in a state of squalor, with garbage, animal feces, and rotting food strewn throughout. This environment not only posed health risks, but also reflected the overall neglect Judah experienced. Beyond the physical mistreatment, Judah suffered severe emotional abuse. He was isolated from other family members and denied affection. This isolation was particularly evident during family gatherings. In one instance, a family member visited the home for a birthday party for one of the other children. Judah's absence was noted, but Alan Morgan lied, claiming Judah was at a friend's house. In reality, the 4-year-old was confined to the basement, hidden away from family and potential help. While Alan Morgan was the primary abuser, Mary Yoder's role in Judah's suffering cannot be overlooked. Although she denied participating in the physical abuse, she admitted to keeping Judah in the basement and being aware of the ongoing abuse. She told investigators that she, quote, could have put a stop to this but didn't, a chilling admission of her complicity in the suffering. On October 10, 2021, Judah's family home in Hamlet, Indiana was the site of a birthday party for one of his siblings. Despite the celebration occurring in the house, Judah was conspicuously absent. When a family member asked about the boy, Judah's father lied and claimed that he was out with a friend. But as we all know, this was a lie, and instead, Judah was actually trapped in the basement. Mary later admitted to investigators that the last time she saw her son alive was the day before this birthday party. She had left the home to give birth at the hospital, knowing full well that Judah was trapped. The most damning evidence of the abuse came from security footage discovered by police in the Morgan home. This footage captured the horrific final moments of Judah's life. At 12:12 a.m. on October 11th, 2021, the cameras recorded Alan Morgan carrying Judah's lifeless body up from the basement. Court documents reveal that prior to this, Alan had extensively beaten the boy and left him alone in the basement for a staggering 19 hours. What followed was perhaps even more shocking. After bringing Judah's body upstairs, Alan did not immediately seek help. Instead, he waited 40 minutes before finally calling emergency services. This delay in seeking medical assistance likely eliminated any chance of survival for Judah if he was not already deceased. When help finally arrived at the scene, they found Judah unresponsive. The young boy was naked, covered only by a blanket, and his body was cool to the touch. The subsequent autopsy revealed the full extent of the trauma inflicted upon Judah. The official cause of death was listed as blunt force head trauma causing a massive subdural hematoma. This means that Judah had suffered severe blows to his head, resulting in bleeding between the brain and the skull. Such an injury would have caused immense pain and likely led to a loss of consciousness before death. Dr. John Fexco, the forensic pathologist who conducted the autopsy, was deeply affected by what he saw. With 28 years of experience in his field, the doctor stated that these injuries ranked among one of the worst cases of blunt force trauma to the entire body that he had ever encountered in his career. Another doctor noted that Judah was very underweight at the time of his death, estimating that he had been malnourished over at least the last 6-month period. This timeline coincides exactly with Judah's return to his parents' care in April 2021, indicating that the neglect began immediately upon his placement in the home. The condition of the Morgan home further illustrated the neglectful environment in which Judah spent his final months. As I've mentioned earlier, the home contained an immense amount of animal waste, rotting food, trash, and more. Furthermore, a malnourished dog was discovered locked in a crate. Alan Morgan was the first to face legal consequences for his actions. Following Judah's death, he initially fled the scene, leading police on a high-speed chase reaching speeds of up to 119 miles per hour before being apprehended by sheriff's deputies in Knox. In September 2022, he pleaded guilty to murder and battery, resulting in serious bodily injury to a person under 14 years old. This plea came at the 11th hour, and only after Alan realized there was absolutely no chance he could beat this case. On November 29th of the same year, Alan's sentencing hearing took place in the LaPorte County Circuit Court. Alan was given 2 opportunities to express remorse to the court, but declined both times. His lack of remorse was noted by Judge Alavizos, who stated, "He blamed this on everybody but himself. He blamed this on a blur. You don't want to admit you did this to your own child." Ultimately, the judge sentenced Alan Morgan to 70 years in prison. Additionally, it was specified that Morgan would not be eligible for parole until he is at least 80 years old. The legal proceedings against Mary Yoder took longer to resolve. On August 11th, 2023, Mary changed course and entered a guilty plea. She admitted to 2 charges: neglect of a dependent resulting in death and domestic battery to a child. The latter charge related to the abuse suffered by Judah's younger sibling. As part of her plea agreement, additional charges were dropped. Mary expressed remorse during her hearing, stating, "I'm sorry for everything that happened. I wish I could go back and change everything." However, her statement that she missed her sweet boy drew a sharp rebuke from Judge Alavizos, who reportedly responded by grabbing a photo of Judah's autopsy and saying, "Look at him, unbelievable." After hearing arguments from both the prosecution and defense, the judge sentenced Mary Yoder to 42 years in prison.